People throughout history have widely debated the idea of destiny. Is destiny a real thing? Can we control our destiny? Does our destiny change? In his book Factfulness, Hans Rosling explores none of these things. However, he does explore the idea that people think that if a country is doing a particular thing at a given time, it will continue doing it. His primary argument is that of Africa and how it used to be a stagnant continent with little economic growth, but it quickly rose to become one of the fastest growing continents in the world. He wrote the book in 2018 and much has changed since then. Thus, we decided to test his theory by looking at Africa's growth since his book was published to determine whether or not his views remain 5 years later. Our findings showed that his theory holds up. We also used 3 historical examples to support our stance: Venezuela, Poland, and racism in the southern United States. As is commonly known throughout the world, the continent of Africa is deeply impoverished. However, as Rosling states in the book, the continent's GDP, infant mortality, and poverty rates have dropped significantly. Since his book was published in 2018, with much of the work being done well beforehand, we deemed it essential to look at how Africa has improved since 2018 to support the idea of the destiny instinct. Our idea was that if Africa had not improved since then, it would weaken his argument drastically. However, our findings proved quite the opposite. Despite taking a heavy hit from the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, as almost all countries worldwide have, the continent has and will continue to improve rapidly. A telltale sign of the growth in Africa comes from investment in African financial technology companies. In the report on Africa's economic development in 2022, the UN stated that in just 1 year, between 2020 and 21, investment increased from $500 million to $2 billion. This boom alone can create thousands of new jobs, billions of dollars of economic growth, and a new opportunity for Africa to economically equalize itself with the rest of the continents in the world. The World Bank's graphs and calculations expect this growth to continue. After taking a hit from the pandemic, many African countries are expected to accelerate their economic growth from around 4% to 5% on the low end, all the way up to 10% for some nations. The people of Africa will most certainly feel this improvement. People on level 1 may not yet be able to ascend to level 2, but they may have the opportunity to earn a dollar or two extra per day, which would go a long way in improving their living conditions. Experts and researchers confirm that Africa has grown since 2018 and will continue to grow. Therefore, Rosling's stance is supported by the facts of Africa's growth.
Venezuela's history provides an excellent example of the destiny instinct, which is the tendency to believe that innate or past characteristics determine the destiny of people, things, groups, institutions, or cultures. At one point, Venezuela transformed from one of the poorest to one of the wealthiest economies in Latin America. With a per capita GDP higher than Spain, Greece, Israel, and only 13% lower than that of the United Kingdom. However, by the early 2000s, Venezuela became one of the poorest countries in the world, with a per capita non-oil GDP declining by a cumulative 18.64% between 1978 and 2001. The discovery of petroleum in 1912 brought solvency to the government and solved the national debt issue, but it also created problems. The new wealth was not distributed evenly throughout Venezuela's population or geographic area, resulting in a wealthy stateside alongside impoverished people. The destiny instinct led people to assume that Venezuela's fate was sealed by its abundant oil resources and that its wealth would continue to grow indefinitely. One article from an assistant professor at Engl University wrote an article titled Venezuela's Bright Future. This article highlighted how promising Venezuela's future was. However, the reality was different, and the country's destiny was not predetermined. In the end, Venezuela lost nearly all of its wealth due to its reliance on oil, and although many people thought that Venezuela's future was set in stone, Venezuela was held to no destiny. The destiny instinct can blind us to the reality of societies and cultures and lead us to assume that things are fated, unchanging, and unchangeable, when they are not. Venezuela's oil resources did not seal its fate, and its destiny was not predetermined. The country made its own path, regardless of what people thought, and its history shows that societies and cultures can change and evolve, often much faster than we assume.
How people felt about African Americans in the United States has not always been pleasant. An article written by a social scientist with education from Harvard and a professor at Harvard over Black progress states in 1958, 44% of whites said they would move if a Black family became their next door neighbor. Today, the figure is 1%. As the years passed, the feelings toward African Americans improved, but it took some time to see a real change. Another quote from the article says, in 1964, the year the Great Civil Rights Act was passed, only 18% of whites claimed to have a friend who was Black. Today, 86% say they do, while 87% of Blacks assert they have white friends. Looking at it in this light, the destiny instinct is completely contradicted. In the early stages of the United States, most African Americans worked manual labor jobs, such as laborers of land and sharecroppers. A small 5% of African American men worked white-collar jobs that didn't require manual labor. 6 out of 10 African American women were household servants who, driven by economic desperation, often worked 12-hour days for pathetically low wages. Even African Americans lucky enough to own businesses were still barred by segregation and struggle. Fast forward to the late 1990s, these percentages and numbers have upended. 60% of Black women and a little over 30% of Black men worked white-collar jobs that were not strictly manual labor. African American men's and women's home ownership rose dramatically, along with college enrollment and life expectancy. African American citizens went from being trapped in poverty to rising into America's middle class. These people were destined for awful lives at one point, but that has completely changed as the years have passed. African Americans were first enslaved people without citizenship. As the years passed, many laws enacted by the United States government were designed to change that. The 13th Amendment was put into place to abolish slavery on December 6, 1865. Just because slavery was now abolished did not mean that American citizens would stop discriminating or trying to re-enslave African Americans. Then there came the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which granted birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment forbids state governments from taking away the fundamental rights of citizenship, and the 15th Amendment prohibits the federal and state government from denying any American citizen the right to vote. All of these steps were taken by the United States government to inch closer and closer to equality. Though all these laws were set into place, loopholes were still found. More laws came to protect the rights of African American citizens, such as the Civil Rights Acts of 1871, 1964, and 1968. These acts were accompanied by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. All of these laws put into place show a significant cultural shift in the United States took place toward the African American people. Every bit of this information proves that the destiny instinct is flawed or altogether just wrong.
Poland was a struggling communist country that needed to change, but many thought since they had struggled for so long, their destiny was a failure. They were determined to change their way, so they came up with the Balcerowicz plan to rapidly change their economy and convert their failing communist views to a strong capitalist country. This is a great example of the destiny instinct that Rosling uses as a chapter in his book, Factfulness. The Balcerowicz plan, or known as shock therapy, was created by experts from Poland in 1989. The plan was meant to attack and defeat Poland's financial and structural crisis. Many other countries have adopted this plan in modified forms. The plan showed growth for Poland in the 1990s, but led unprofitable industries to the brink of bankruptcy. The plan looked shaky when it seemed to just be succeeding. It later leveled out and paved the way for future business owners and entrepreneurs, while making the economy stronger than neighboring countries. In 2009, Europe was in a major recession, but Poland showed growth throughout the period of time because of its plan in 1989. Poland's GDP per capita has increased by 6% in the past 20 years. Poland has continued to grow, and the World Bank predicts them to stay one of the more dominant countries in Europe. Poland is the fifth largest economy by GDP in the European Union and sixth by nominal GDP. Poland's brand power, entrepreneurship, and hard work have paved the way as well for their economy to strive.
The destiny instinct can make us use trends from the past to define a nation's future. This instinct has been proven wrong time and time again throughout history. Poland, along with many others, including Venezuela, racism in the South, and Africa, prove Rosling's theory in the book Factfulness correct, that we shouldn't base our opinions or theories on a nation's past failures or successes.